Greetings, I'm Aaron Walton, and I'm a SOC analyst and one of the main authors of the quarterly threat report. And also today with me is Art. Art is a senior detection and response engineer manager here at Expel. We're here today to talk a bit about our quarterly threat report for the third quarter. In this presentation, we're going to give a bit of an overlook of what is in the report itself. We're going to look at the report and the data from a 10,000-foot view, and then we're also going to look at two things that became quarterly spotlights for us within the report. In the report, we primarily look at incidents that we've identified across our customer base and across the quarter. An incident is defined as a security event where an asset or a user has been compromised to some extent. In our data, we're looking at everything from AWS accounts to server exploitation to account takeover and many other things. And over the past year, one of the things that we noticed rise substantially was account compromise. And a large part of this is due to increases amounts of adversary in the middle attack techniques. We've pulled forward some of those numbers to discuss them here. As shown on the previous slide, we had a large percent based on identity attacks. Art, can you talk a little bit more about identity attacks? What are they and how do customers protect themselves from them?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Aaron. So this is a really interesting number, the 71%. So not only is it a 7% increase this quarter, but it's a 7% increase the last time we did this report. So overall, we're seeing identity-based attacks continue to be super prevalent. This shouldn't surprise anybody. This has been a thing for a very long time. They like to say, and I'm going to say it here, identity is the new perimeter, right? I'll put a nickel in that swear jar if I have to. But the point is, it works, and attackers know that, and they're taking advantage of it. So we see these attacks come through phishing attacks, which we'll talk a little bit more about, including some new and novel phishing attacks that are plaguing users and organizations these days. An attacker in the middle infrastructure as well, and this could be attackers basically taking advantage of their own infrastructure and pointing you to it either through DNS-based attacks, through phishing attacks, but they're tricking you into going to their infrastructure in some way, shape, or form. You're doing that authentication workflow, and they're capturing a token or a cookie, something that says you've already authenticated, and then they're presenting that back to the server as if you've already authenticated. The way that we look at these attacks and the way that we detect them here at Expel is a little bit can be challenging, especially because that type of signal can be hard to detect. But the good news is we are protecting our customers, and we have some ideas that we want to share with you on how you can protect your organization as well. So the main thing to look for here is, number one, if you can, you want to look for a signal where you're seeing a cookie login from maybe a couple of different IP addresses, especially places that you don't know, right? Foreign countries, places that are geo-impossible events, IP addresses that maybe look funny to you. And you want to be able to have a signal for those and then write a detection for it. The other thing that's really helpful is when we look at behavior-based attacks, there's a really common pattern that we see, and that is the attacker will compromise that account. They'll typically take that information, they'll log in as the user, and then they want to establish persistence, right? And that's a really common trend. And the way that we establish persistence with authentication is by registering often new multi-factor authentication techniques. So they might register another SMS number, they might register a hardware token like a YubiKey or something similar, right? So if you have that type of signal, you can start to look for these types of attacks and detect that type of pattern. They're certainly more prevalent. If I was running a security team, I would probably prioritize this as one of the top detections to continue to build out and prioritize as we head into Q4. So Aaron, I'll turn it back over to you.
From the SOC side, we've appreciated a lot of those new detections as well. We look for a lot of things such as those devices being registered from suspicious locations, just that we're able to check against the user's baseline and observe that type of activity and fire off an alert. I know these have often been pretty high fidelity as well. So we're grateful for the engineering side implementing those types of things. Also, one thing we talked about in the report, and we had mentioned here on the screen as well, that over half of the incidents were in a Microsoft 365 environment. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we dug into this, as you and your team dug into this, I think what we found is, it's not just because Microsoft is the most prevalent. That's certainly a lot of it, but also we see a lot of behaviors in user environments that aren't necessarily that aren't necessarily best practice. That's what I'm trying to say. And so when we talk about and we look at things like this, when we look at patterns in this, what we see password reuse quite often. We see old passwords, which again falls into password reuse. But we see passwords be password spraying, where attackers have a password list that they're trying to reuse passwords that they've seen in the past. They're trying to compromise based on a list of passwords that they have, and oftentimes they're successful with this. Now, Microsoft does a really good job protecting their customers, and they generate a really good signal for that. Unfortunately, account compromise does happen, and this can be because not only was there password reuse, but we're seeing MFA fatigue become a problem as well, where an attacker continues to authenticate and the user continues to get a push to their phone or mobile device, and eventually they just say yes, right? Either because they think there's something weird going on here, or in some cases, we saw some organizations, not necessarily Expel customers, but some organizations where an attacker pretended to be someone from the IT service desk and was able to convince a user to accept an MFA push that way. So account compromise and account takeover, super common. Microsoft is doing a really good job here protecting their customers. But as we continue to see and look across the environment, this is a really common attack pattern.
What can really be done about these types of issues like MFA fatigue?
Yeah, so a lot of this comes down to training, right? And helping your users understand what is good look like and what does bad look like. And so ways that I've seen this be successful in the past is to, during your annual security training, make sure this is part of it. Talk about what MFA alert fatigue looks like or push fatigue looks like. Talk about what to do, because sometimes users just don't know what the next step is. So talking about what to do when they see a push like this, what happens on the other end. A lot of time you hear users say things like, well, I didn't want to bother anybody. I didn't know if it was real. I didn't want to pull the fire alarm. I didn't want to be the person to cause a bother. So it's really important to address those in your security training up front. The other thing that you can look for is, these are noisy events when you're doing pushes like this. So when you start to see multiple failures or you start to see multiple pushes to a device with no response, those are good opportunities to take and build a detection around that signal. The other thing that we do here at Expel that I think we do really well is we're able to correlate across different pieces of technology so that we can answer this question with really high confidence of, is this an accidental push? Is this something that the user was expecting, or is this something that could be a compromise event?
Awesome. Yeah, I know at Expel, identity stuff is definitely our bread and butter. We make a lot of detections for it, and part of that is because of attackers targeting it so much. So it makes a really squeaky wheel that gets lots of detections, right? Because once an attacker compromises an account, that provides them with a lot of access, whether that's through VPN, whether it's to physical devices, whether it's to accounts and to account information. But another thing we do talk about in the report is commodity malware, which out of all the incidents that we saw, commodity malware made up about 23% of total incidents throughout the quarter. For context, the term commodity malware refers to malware that's sold on the dark market. It's available for attackers to use. We do talk about this a bit more in depth within the report. We talk about different types of commodity malware, and also we noticed that about half of the incidents we saw presented a significant risk to the environment, such as something we would consider pre-ransomware or remote access as well. The other stats we have on this are a little bit lower numbers, but we wanted to comment about them anyways. Such as red teams, we actually saw this number was a bit down this quarter. It might be that they're making up for that in the following quarter, which is what it feels like from the SOC side anyway. I can tell you that. But it was at least an interesting trend since we have seen some just difficulties in the economy. We'll see how that goes. We also still seeing compromised AWS credentials. We also have seen very little advanced persistent threat. And part of the reason this is advanced persistent threats such as nation states usually make up a small portion because they're also, they don't operate on the same scale as other threat actors. When you think of some of these botnets or these other criminal gangs, which can send out millions of emails. Sometimes when you go to conferences about advanced persistent threat, you hear about this one malware sample they had, or these few phishing emails that were sent out. By contrast, you have millions sent out from these other criminal gangs. Apart from that, we didn't want to spotlight two interesting things we found and we talked about in a bit more detail in the report. Primarily attackers using Microsoft Teams and the abuse of QR codes. So the short story is we saw multiple incidents where attackers were abusing Microsoft Teams. In one concrete example, the attacker impersonated a CEO, and they used Teams to send a chat invite, and they sent a link with the malicious file. And they were able to do this because they had compromised a Microsoft 365 account and gained access to Teams from another organization. And once they have that possibility in that account, they're able to send chat invites to any other organization using Teams. And this attacker had done their homework in the multiple instances that we saw. And they crafted their lure very intentionally and sent a long message regarding this update. And when the user would click and download that, it would execute a script, which would download Darkgate malware, which is something we talk about a bit more in the report. But the short of it is Darkgate will download other tools. That's its main purpose. And in this incident, it would download other remote access tools to the device. What we did, we were able to alert on the activity pretty early, and we were able to issue auto remediation through our workbench in order to contain those assets that have been compromised. With some of the earlier alerts, we were also then able to start scoping and see if any other users had downloaded this malicious file or connected to the same domains. The customers we worked with recognized this attack vector and the need to change some of their policies in regards to Teams, such as, like I said, by default, it allows external organizations to send messages. Due to the high risk, some of our customers decided to change that to whitelisting, so they have to allow specific organizations to send messages. I'm going to hand it over to Art to talk about some of what we've been seeing with QR codes.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. All right, so let's talk a little bit about QR phishing. This is an area that I think is really exciting for all the wrong reasons. But phishing is finally evolving. Since the advent of email, phishing has always kind of looked the same, right? And now we're adding QR codes to it. So welcome to the 21st century phishing. There's not a lot here that's different from regular phishing in terms of the problem, right? We're still relying on people that want huge discounts. They want priority parking someplace. They want financial incentives. Their boss has maybe accidentally leaked a juicy document to them from their work account. Like, these are all the initial triggers that you typically see, the red flags that you see on phishing accounts. And they may be shaped slightly differently than those things, but they're still relying on a sense of urgency, a financial benefit, something like that, to get you to click the link in your traditional phishing email. QR phishing is a little bit different. Not in the problem set, but how it's executed. I think the shift is happening here for a lot of reasons. Number one, there's an opportunity, but number two, endpoints where you traditionally would try to trick people into doing phishing. There's a lot of technology now that protects the user endpoints, your laptop computers and things like that, where the security controls on a mobile endpoint are maybe a little bit more lax, but they have all of the same capabilities, they have all of the same access in a lot of cases, and so that's presenting an opportunity, and it presents an opportunity to change the way that phishing is working. This ties back to, by the way, this ties back to exactly what we were talking about earlier with account compromise, account takeover, malicious act in the middle attacks, things like that. Like, this is how they start typically, either through a direct phishing email or QR code. The way that we handle that here at Expel, again, it looks very similar to your traditional phishing. We can help our users by taking a look at those. We can do that manual execution of QR codes to see is it malicious, is it non-malicious, and then we can report back to the users. We can take that out of the inbox for organizations, things like that. But we also have the ability to provide that defense in depth. We're not just monitoring one signal, but we're monitoring a lot of signals across a lot of different applications and a lot of different integrations that our customers have brought to us. This is really good. As we continue to see this on the rise, I think we've got good controls around this right now. We'll continue to evolve them, of course, as we continue to see this evolve. But if you're watching this and you're wondering, okay, well, that's great, but how do I protect my org? What else could I be doing? There are a couple of things, right? So number one, recognize that the threat could be on the endpoint for phishing and QR phishing, but more likely the threat is probably going to be on some sort of mobile device, something with a camera on it. And so making sure that you have good controls in place for not only what those mobile endpoints can run and what they can do on your network. A lot of time it's BYOD. But you may want to change your access policies to say, if you're trying to access a sensitive site, a sensitive service from a specific mobile device, a version of iOS, for example, maybe it's Android, you might just say, look, it needs to be up to date, it needs to be patched, it needs to be this tall to ride the ride, and if it doesn't, don't allow access. And that can be some inconvenient in some cases, but for the most prized data, for the things that have your PII, for your most sensitive data that you have in your organization, it might be the right call for you. The other thing you can do is, if you have a team internally that does phishing, maybe they do their initial phishing triage or triage as an organization, there are some websites out there that can take a QR code, they can execute it, they can give you back the result, like here's what the URL was, and then you can decide what to do with it from there. So there are some tools out there as well to help protect you and your organization against defense in depth is really the name of the game here. You have to realize that the threat is no longer on the laptop endpoint, but it's shifted to the mobile device for the most part when it comes to QR code phishing. And so managing what those devices can do and where they can go is really critical to your security infrastructure and posture. All right, and with that, I'll just say we've talked about a lot of topics here. We've really just hit the tip of the iceberg in what's in this report. There's a lot of great information about what attackers are doing on the internet right now, what our SOC, who's protecting hundreds of customers, is seeing day over day, and especially over the quarter. And if you want more information and what's in the report, if you want more information about what Expel is doing or can be doing, or how to protect yourself and what threats matter or emerging, this is a great report to take a look at. So if you need to, reach out, give us a call, send an email, download the report, take a look. Always happy to help. So thank you so much, Aaron. It was great having you. Thank you for allowing me to be on this webinar with you. It's been great. And I think that we're going to say goodbye now. So thanks, everybody.